Phase 5 of the MCU continues with the Marvels. This is the sequel to Captain Marvel, which came out back in 2019, right before Avengers Endgame. Brie Larson, of course, returns as Carol Danvers, and Teyonah, Parris, and Iman Vellani join her. So this kind of makes it not only a sequel to Captain Marvel, but it makes it somewhat a sequel to WandaVision, definitely a sequel to Miss Marvel, which if you didn't sit through that whole show last year, man, you're missing out. That show was a lot of fun. So what do we got here? Carol Danvers has reclaimed her identity from the tyrannical Kree, and she's taken revenge on the Supreme Intelligence. But unintended consequences see her shouldering the burden of a destabilized universe, which at this point, Phase 5, it should be considered the multiverse now. When her duty sent her to an anomalous wormhole linked to a Kree revolutionary, her powers become entangled with two other superheroes, one of whom being her niece, played by Teyonah Parris in Monica Rambeau, and we saw her get her powers and somewhat her origin in WandaVision. And of course, Captain Marvel's biggest fan, Kamala Khan, played once again by Iman Vellani, and these three team up to form a trio known as the Marvels. Now honestly, that first Captain Marvel movie really wasn't doing much for me. I don't know if it was a case of direction that made Brie Larson just emotionless in the role, but I thought in terms of the ideas and the 90s nostalgia, that movie is a fun enough watch. And I was hoping that the Marvels would get over that hump and at least be better than that original Captain Marvel flick. And the trailers with Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys written all over it, the trailers really weren't doing much for me if I'm being honest. But after sitting through the Marvels, even though the storyline, yes, it may be throwing a lot at you for a breezy hour and 45 minutes, I don't want to hear anybody tell me that the MCU is dead. I don't want to hear anybody tell me that the MCU is phoning it in right now, because the Marvels was a buttload of fun. And a big part of that has to do with our three leading ladies here. The trailers here basically promise you a lot of girl power, a great team up, and a bunch of flarkin'. My god, that whole sequence at the top of the third act with all those cute little kitty cats. Like, yeah, if you're a cat lover, you will really love the Marvels. But the movie pretty much gives you exactly what the trailer was advertising. And yeah, even though this might just feel like another Marvel adventure without the flavor of Nia DaCosta for a lot of people, I will tell you this much. Having Nia DaCosta come in to direct this feature, it does wonders for the characters, and it does wonders for the action sequences also. Nia DaCosta has proven that she can make a great horror flick. When the Candyman remake came out a couple of years ago, I loved that thing. But I thought the way she helms these action sequences and the whole layout of the action sequences, it was really freaking creative. Because again, as you see in the trailer, this is going to be a spoiler-free review. Do not worry, I will save spoiler thoughts for the live stream. But this is a fun gimmick of basically all three Marvels having to tag each other in and out of certain situations, and they swap places. Here's a good handful of really neat action sequences, and the creativity just flourishes in this. And let me tell you, this looks marvelous on the big screen. No pun intended, of course. Maybe pun intended. But I really do think that the heart and soul of this movie is in these three performers at the center of it. Brie Larson, I think, is really coming into her own as Carol Danvers here. She seems so much more comfortable in front of the camera, so much more comfortable with this character and the trauma that she's experienced. My lord, Teyonah Parris, I was so excited to see her again as Captain Rambeau, because I feel like she stole the show in WandaVision, and she hasn't seen her Aunt Carol for quite some time, and it leads to some kind of awkward tension between the two. But at least it's a much needed conversation that naturally happens and progresses between the two. And the script definitely does a good job at presenting that material. And I think Teyonah Parris plays so well off of Brie Larson. Teyonah Parris, I feel like, can play super well with anybody. She's a freaking natural. Speaking of naturals, Iman Vellani steals the entire movie. Let me just tell you that much. She brings so much bright, wonderful energy to any project she has, and I believe Ms. Marvel was her debuting role. I definitely could be very wrong about that research, but let me just tell you, Iman Vellani is a name to watch out for in the future of the MCU, or MCM, depending on who you talk to. And she sells those starstruck moments so incredibly well. Like, she has, like, even just thinking about it right now, she had me chuckling so much. And you want to know something else? It is very abundantly clear that Iman Vellani was a massive fan of the MCU before she landed this role. And you can just tell in her performance, she is so excited to be there with these people. And I feel like with how polarizing the MCU has suddenly become, you need that reinvigoration of a fan from the inside. You really need a fan playing one of these heroes to really light a fire under the rest of this fan base. And man, she does a wonderful job in this. There's a lot of great moments involving her family, which I loved in Ms. Marvel. And that sort of leads me into my issues with the Marvels. It is very much counting on the audience to have seen Ms. Marvel before going into the theater to watch this thing. There is a brief recap of what goes on, but I really don't feel like it's enough to establish Ms. Marvel as a character just in terms of movies. Like, for instance, there's this whole backstory about the bangle that she wears on her wrist and how it's a family relic. I watched Ms. Marvel, so I understood everything that was going on, but I feel like if you went in completely blind, had no idea who Kamala Khan actually was, then you'd probably be sitting there a little bit confused watching it and how this movie lays her out. On the contrary, though, there are some brilliant flashback sequences involving Monica Rambeau, Carol Danvers, and Maria Rambeau, and that really sets up the plight and the conflict and the friction between those two. And I was kind of hoping that for the casual viewers, not necessarily myself, but I was really hoping that this script would open up the moviegoer's eyes to who Kamala Khan actually was. And I'm just talking about the people who did not sit through the TV show. And if you haven't at this point, you definitely should. And let me actually say this for the record. I really enjoyed the Marvels, clearly. I think this project has a lot of energy being thrown into it, great leading performances, great direction, lots of kiddie moments involving Goose that had me rolling on the floor, and Iman Vellani's reactions to Goose and the antics that Goose gets into. Yeah, it's pretty freaking funny and really creative, actually. I'm sure critics will find one sequence involving the kiddies really stupid, but I'm sorry, I found it really funny and actually kind of clever what they do. I didn't even mention Samuel L. Jackson. He is great as he usually is as Nick Fury. Although I found it very odd that this movie does not really mention Secret Invasion much, if not at all. Is the MCU already pegging Secret Invasion as the redheaded stepchild of the franchise? I mean, they probably should. You could get a whole saga out of the Secret Invasion storyline and you just get 6 episodes. I digress. But this really feels like an old school MCU movie coming out from like phase 2. Because you have the fun soundtrack, you have the great team up, you have the funny dialogue, and you have this immaculate action, and just the way it's shot and shown to you is really something. I mean, yeah, really, it does have the essence of a phase 2 Marvel movie. I mean, you have Samuel L. Jackson coming back, a boring villain. Oh, wait. Boring villain. Yeah, let's talk about her. Now, I know Zawe Ashton is a great actress, and she is selling every bit of dialogue that she has. Every little crumb of dialogue that is left over for her. Every little crumb of development left over for her. You can tell that she is trying her damnedest. But my god, if you want to think of one MCU villain who is more boring than Ronan from the first Guardians of the Galaxy, here she is. Because if you go in and watch the Marvels and you leave the theater at the end, you'll remember precisely 0 things about this villain. Which, if you remember from old school Marvel, their weakness was writing villains. So that's partly what I mean by the Marvels kinda is going back to basics, which honestly, at this point, phase 5, 30 some odd movies in, they shouldn't be doing that. They should still be experimenting as many ways as they can, and they do in the Marvels. But I feel like all the complaints of the casual fan base who just can't keep up with all the content that they're cranking out, I think Marvel Studios is really starting to listen to the casuals and not necessarily the hardcores. And I get it. That's not a bad thing at all. But the fact that we only have one Marvel movie coming out next year, I don't know. It just makes me sad. But for what it is, the Marvels, I think, is way better than a lot of people are giving it credit for. Even though there is a lot being thrown at you in a very zippy runtime, the characters and the connection and the team up that they have, along with how the action is directed, I really think that's what puts the Marvels over the top for me. I think this is way better than the original Captain Marvel. I would rather rewatch this one over and over again in comparison to that original flick. And this just makes me really want to see more Ms. Marvel, man. And judging from the ending of this movie, it looks like we're getting it without spoiling anything. I'm going to give the Marvels a B+. If that sounds like a fanboy grade, I'm trying to be completely fair to this movie. And yes, in case you're wondering, per MCU tradition, there is one mid-credits sequence, and me and my buddy almost fell out of our seats with the surprise they throw at you. Again, not going to get into what that surprise is, I'm gonna save that for the spoiler stream, to be determined. Let me know what you thought of the Marvels down in the comments section below. Who is your favorite member of this trio? And what is your favorite Marvel movie up to this point? What's been your favorite in the multiverse saga so far, movie or show? There's loads that we can discuss, all things MCU. This channel is the place to do it. It's a great community of film lovers and entertainment lovers alike. Y'all are invited to the party. So do consider subscribing today and tap on that thumbs up as well. That would really help a lot. Stay tuned for more videos very soon. I have yet to watch the Loki Season 2 finale at the time of recording. You can bet your ass that I'll be right back here in this chair talking about the whole season with you guys. And I'll see you guys there. Y'all are the best. Thank you so much again for tuning in. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.